All right, this is Beth Billings, and I'm from Around the Table Yarns, and we are doing our sock club. This is our, we're going to be working on the Kindling sock by Lindsey Fowler. So that's the Kindling socks, and here's a photograph of it. I had to print it out in black and white because my printer is running low on ink, or was at least at that moment. And I have a sample of the socks here that I finished. And when last we met, we had talked about doing a gauge swatch and measuring across our gauge swatch. So I don't know if people took the time to do that or not. The people in our morning class did. And so I just want to go quickly over that part of it and measuring and sort of figuring things from your gauge swatch. Here's my dog has stolen my ruler. I'm blaming the dog. There you go. 1 second. Oh, you know what? It's in here. It's in my sock bag. Yep. You know, when you have 3 bags and you put it in the other bag. All right. So I just want to point out, I knitted this at 40 stitches across, and I could take my gauge from the edge of the very messy stitches, but this here is a stitch that's kind of deteriorated. And this is a stitch that's kind of deteriorated. So I feel like it would be better for my gauge estimates to go on the inside of that stitch. Let me zoom in. So do you see how unruly the edge looks? And it also looks pretty unruly on this side. So I'm going to ignore this edge stitch, and I'm going to measure from the inside of it on both sides. And that way I will have a more accurate edge. Notice the rounding of the swatch. You see how it has kind of rounded edges? This is why you have to go more than an inch for a swatch. This is my cast on, and the cast on itself is distorting the actual length of the swatch. So even though I did a nice loose stretchy cast on, I did the German twisted, it still pulls in at that point. And here's my ribbing. Now it's a pretty stretchy ribbing, it's not, but it pulls it in here as well. So if I want to estimate my stitch width, my best estimate of the true width of the stitch, I think, is from the middle. And I really feel like you need at least an inch or 2 from each side to be able to do that. And so that's why we have at least, you know, an inch from the cast off, the cast on, because you really need you need it to like get away from where it's distorted to be able to check that length. So I'm laying it flat, and I'm laying, I actually like to do this more with a rigid ruler, but I don't have one on me. And I just want to point out that I know that I put 40 stitches on here. I'm subtracting the one on this end, and I'm subtracting the one on this end. And I have 4.5 inches of knitting in between. So my gauge is 38 stitches to 4.5 inches. So that's not a very handy gauge. So we're going to do a little math. Oh, it's very bright. Oh, please. Oh, is that not reading at all? I have a bright light in my office. Okay, so 38 stitches divided by 4.5 gives me 8.44 stitches to the inch. So on the sheet that we were working through last week, we talked about calculating, and so here's that math. 38 stitches divided by 4.5 inches equals 8.44 stitches to the inch. So then we calculated my ankle circumference, because we decided that our ankle circumference and our foot circumference, I chose the smaller one because I want these to fit more firmly. So they're within a half an inch of each other, but I chose the ankle circumference because that's where I'm going to start, and because I want it to fit more firmly. And if I choose to, I can decrease fewer stitches to fit around my foot. So I'm sorry, that is zoomed too far out, so you can't see it. So my measurements were larger for around my foot and a little bit smaller for around my ankle. You may be opposite, you may be the same, but we're going to start with the top down or the leg down cast on. And so I'm going to start by fitting my ankle. I'm probably going to stick with that measurement. And so what I want to do is find negative ease. I want my ease to be, my fit to be tighter than my actual leg is. So I multiply my measurement of 8 inches by 0.9, and I get 7.2 inches. I multiply that 7.2 times 8.44, which is the gauge I got up here, and that comes out to 60.77. And of the choices in the pattern, it's approximately 61. I could either go down to 56 or up to 64. So I'm going to go up to 64 because I chose the smaller of my measurements. So I feel like I would be safer going up. You might be close, like if your number comes out to 57, you might feel like you're more comfortable doing 56 stitches. So it kind of depends on what this number comes out to. And this number again is your negative ease measurement times your actual gauge. And wherever that comes out, you want to choose a number that fits the pattern that's close to yours. Now, if you are way off or nervous, or you didn't like the gauge in your swatch, so today, this morning, somebody had done this and their gauge was really big on the swatch. So they were getting not 8.44 stitches to the inch, but more like 7 stitches to the inch. So it was a much bigger gauge than this. And so we decided that she would sort of split the difference, and she went down a needle size, because when you're working with size 1 or 1.5 or 0 needles, the difference between them is minuscule. So she went down a needle size, but she stuck with the same number of stitches. And so she was going to make her fabric a little firmer. She could do another gauge swatch, but we didn't feel like that was absolutely essential. The other thing is that when you do your sock, it is the best gauge swatch that you have. And so trying it on is important. So once we've done the cuff, please, before you go onto the foot, make sure that you slip it onto your foot and make sure that the cuff goes all the way above your ankle, where it's going to be on your leg. Because you will be very sad if you do all of the knitting and you've never tried the sock on. So that's my recommendation. Does anybody have questions about the math assignment? Nope. Okay. So I wanted to demonstrate the cast on today, and I've done this before, but I really like the German twisted cast on, and I think she just says in the pattern to cast on. And again, this is a for purchase pattern that we're using, so I'm not going to show the pattern on the video, and I'm not going to give specific information beyond that we're working on a number of stitches, because that infringes on copyright. So we have to be very careful to be respectful of that, even though we've all bought it. The video is public and free. And so we're just going to be super careful about that. If you have specific questions that you need detailed answers to, we can do that off of the video, either in the shop, by phone, however you want to do it, or when we're done with the video at the end of this. Okay, so for those of you following along at home, see, here's my beautiful picture of the socks with my terrible printer ink. We are turning to page 4 to the cast on. And I'm assuming that you've all chosen a size at this point that is suitable for your gauge. And you've chosen how you're going to work it, whether you're going to work on small circulars or double points or magic loop. Is there anybody using small circulars? Nope. Is there anybody using double points? Okay. So I will reference as though, not as though, because everybody is doing magic loop, and I'm going to show the setup for magic loop. So here's my main color yarn, and I was discussing this in class today with the people in the store, that I estimate my length for my long tail cast on by holding the yarn an arm's length away, like you would measure fabric. So here I am holding the yarn. I'm going to hold it an arm's length away. And this is my overestimate of 30 stitches. It's way more than 30 stitches. I know it's more than 30 stitches, but I like this length. And I'll do it again for roughly 60 stitches. Okay, so that's how I estimate. Am I right? No. Have I overestimated? Yes. Am I going to have to do it twice? Probably not. Just saying. For the German twisted cast on, you loop. So that's where my, I have the length of my tail. The tail should be over your thumb, because it is the yarn that's over your pointer finger that you use more of. So you should use more of the working yarn and not more of the tail. So loop the tail towards you over your thumb and the working yarn over your pointer finger, and grasp them underneath so it makes a triangle around. Alternately, you can grasp them and open the triangle. And this is the setup that we normally do for a long tail cast on. So now I'm going to come from behind the yarn, and I'm going to turn my needle, and that will count for me as my first stitch. Okay, I'm just going to show that again. I come from behind the yarn, so between my hand and the yarn, I push my needle against it and turn it up. So now I'm making a V. And what I want to do is take this needle, circle it underneath both strands on my thumb, come up to the top and run it down my thumb and towards me. So I've gone around, I'm going to show it again. I go around my thumb and down. I go over the strand on my pointer, and I need to get it back through this twisted loop on my thumb. So the easiest thing for me to do is bend my thumb a little bit to untwist, and then you can run it back through that loop. And that makes your first stitch. Let's do it again. So I grasp the yarn and spread it to make a V. I go under both strands that are on my thumb and down my thumb through that loop. I carry the tip of the needle over the strand coming from my pointer finger. And then if I turn the needle and go in and under the loop that's on the bottom of my thumb, that makes the first stitch. So around and down and over. Another way that you could look at it, do you see that little cross right by the tip of my needle? If I just bring the needle, lost it. That's what I get for watching the video. So if I go there, imagine bringing your needle, that this loop comes under this strand. Around and down and through. Is anybody having any trouble with that? It's sort of tricksy. But once you start doing it, it's a very addictive and satisfying edge. I'll show you some of these stitches closer up. They have a beaded appearance and they're quite stretchy. So Elfrida was talking about making her socks and having a long tail cast on versus the German twisted. And she said that she found that the German twisted is much less likely to give her what she's called a hard edge to her sock, to her cast on edge of her sock. So another thing I thought about this week, I was teaching beginning knitting for the first time in a while. And, you know, I've had different ways of describing the tension that we hold our yarn at when we're casting on. And I've tried to think of different ways to describe the tension, because I don't want you to pull tight, but I don't want you to be so loose that it floats away. And so that made me think about helium balloons. So the tension I think you should have on your yarn is really like the tension of a helium balloon string. Does that make any sense? So when you're wrapping and doing and all of that, I don't want you to pull tighter than what you would feel from like holding a balloon string, right? That it's straight, it's holding itself taut, but it's not pulling away from you. Does that make sense? So the tension for your cast on really ought not to be tightened at all. I had to stop one of my class members this morning from tightening after every stitch. She was adjusting and you couldn't move the stitches up and down the needle. She was also using a bamboo needle, which was a little bit stickier, but still her stitches were not, they were not gentle enough. And I think we have to be gentle with our cast on stitches because we want our foot to go in and out of this. We want them to be very elastic and we want them to last a long time. So if we pull too tight, we risk creating an edge that we have to really stretch out every time we want to put our foot into it. And I've done that before and I'm determined I'm not going to keep doing it. Any thoughts about that? Anybody have any questions or thoughts? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm casting on all of the 54 stitches. And I'm doing it the same way. Again, I come right around. It's that last part I think that people struggle with. So I just think about coming back in where I went with when I went into that stitch in the first place. And that's how I make them. That's how I make my German twisted. It's also called the Old Norwegian, so it's not just the Germans who get to claim it. And there may be other people who have figured this out one way or another. I had somebody who was casting on like this. So, you know, normally when you do the two-handed, you just open that loop and go around it. So I was trying to figure out, so you would go like this and then go around it, and then you have to untwist it. That worked? I don't know if that worked. Yeah, let's try it again. Things you should try before you demonstrate them. Okay, so you go around and through and over and back through. Oh, yeah, you can do it. Over and back through. So that would be another way, if you're having trouble getting it, that would be another way to do it, is to use both hands. But again, without pulling hard on your yarn. So like when I finished making this stitch, I don't tighten it. So many people do this when they're learning to knit, and I don't understand it, but I know I do understand it. I think they're trying to make their stitches even. They want them to be pretty and even. And the problem is that it doesn't really help. All right, so back to, I like to do it with one hand, but you can do it with both if that's your preference. And I'm going to 64. And so to get this started, 21, 24, pardon me while I count, 27, 33, 6, 9, 42, 45. Almost there. Nine, 10. That's my last one. I think I'll double check. Okay, so notice on my needles that these stitches move easily from the needle to the cable and back again. They're not pulling. If you are unable to do the German twisted cast on, that's okay. You can do any cast on that works for you, but try to make sure when you do it that you are not creating tight stitches, that there's plenty of elasticity between your stitches. So I like the German twisted, but I am aware that it is 1 or 2 extra steps of casting on, and the point is to get your socks started. So if you like a knitted cast on, I wouldn't do just a backwards loop cast on. I don't think that that's sturdy enough for a sock. That's when you just do this. But if that's the only cast on you got to do what you got. All right. So now, Dog's trying to eat my needles. So now we're ready to join in the round. And for those of you who have not done joining in the round for socks, it doesn't matter which way you do it, whether it's on 9 inches or magic loop or double points, it's always a moment to get them to join in the round. So I have all of my stitches here. They are close to the tip on the right-hand side of my large circular needle that I'm using. And I'm going to count from either end to get to the halfway point. So I'm going to count from this end, and I want 32 stitches because I'm using 64. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 32. And then just because I like to be sure that I did it all right, 3, 6, 9, 12, 18, 21, 24, 27, 32. Perfect. So I'm holding between my fingers between the 32nd and the 33rd stitches from either end. So I'm going to move that section of the knitting onto the cable. And I'm going to spread them apart a little bit so I don't lose it. And then what I want to do is bend my cable right at that point and pull to make a loop come out. Okay. I'm going to, let's just lay it on the table to really see it. I'm going to turn the stitches to face each other. And I don't know why I do that. I just think it's tidier. So I turn the stitches to face each other because I'm checking to make sure that nothing is extra twisted around my needles. I have a loop on the left and both points of my needle are coming off from the right. The working yarn and the tail are next to each other because we've done the long tail cast on. If you've done a different cast on, you might have your tail attached to the front needle, but they're both right here for mine. The working yarn I want to hold behind, above, like towards you and behind the back needle. So I'm looking at this, and in your screen, this is the lower needle and the upper needle. When I'm holding them in my hands, I hold them parallel to the floor, and this one is closer to me and this one is further. So I think about the nearer needle and the further needle. The working yarn is on the end of the further needle. Okay, and I've laid it behind so that when I join in the round, it doesn't wrap around my cable. So I've got everything split. They're all lined up. My working yarn is on the rear cable, the further cable, and the yarn is laying over it. I push the stitches for the front half onto the tip of the front needle, not all the way off, just onto the working tip. And that enlarges the loop on my left. It is important to me that you do this first when you're doing magic loop, because sometimes people move the right needle, or what's going to be the needle that we knit onto, the right hand needle, and they lose this loop, and then this disappears and they get frustrated with magic loop. So you push first the stitches onto the front needle, and then pinching the stitches close to each other where they're going to join, you can pull the rear needle, making that loop smaller, but not pulling it all the way out, so that you can turn and make a loop on the right hand side. Once you're there, you can aim for the first stitch that you cast on, that twisted stitch, lift up, lift your tail out of the way, lift your working yarn from the cable, and holding the stitch that you're forming as close to where the yarn is coming from as you can, you're just going to make one stitch. And look, I'm not that close. That's okay. I have tails here and I can weave those together at the end. So don't fuss about how close together your join is, because it all comes out fine. Then this is a knit 2, purl 2 rib. So I'm going to knit the second stitch, moving the yarn, bringing it forward to purl 2. And I'm going to continue like that to the end of my row. Does anybody have any questions about joining in the round for magic loop, or joining in the round otherwise? Lots of heads nodding. So I'm going to work across the 32 stitches of my front half, and then I'm going to demonstrate what I do for the back half. Which is really just like the front. So this is the meat of tonight's demonstration. The second part of the leg is a rib. So we have a cuff that you work for either 2 inches, or if you're making a smaller child size, between 1 or 1.5 inches. So you get to pick what length of cuff. And I will be completely honest with you. I did it as written because Lindsay's going to see my socks. I would only do 1 inch of ribbing if given the option. I don't like ribbing. The dog is having such a good time in the other room right now. So I don't love to rib, and I usually will only do 1 inch of it on any given day. But Lindsay is going to see these, and so I want them to look good. So I did all 2 inches. So that's why I have an unusually long ribbing here for me. But that's what we're going to do, is we're going to do the ribbing, and then without switching needles, we're going to switch to a wide flat rib. I don't know if you can see that well. You can see it now. So it's a setup of, I think it's knit 3, purl 1, knit 7, purl 1 across on both sides. So you are centered. The flat rib is centered on each half of your needles. So you don't start with the purl 1 or a knit 1 or knit 7. You start kind of in the middle of the rib. And then when you work about, I'm checking the pattern. She has you work a set number of times. It's roughly 1/2 inch. And then she has you work a set number of times. Again, I'm not going to talk about actual numbers because of copyright, but then she has you work in this garter stitch. And just to be very clear, the garter stitch is a row of all purl alternating with a row of the flat rib. It is not alternating with a row of all knit. So when you get to this section, do pay attention that the second round, sorry, I said row, is actually still in that flat rib of purl 1, knit 7, purl 1, knit 7. So you're not going to be alternating a purl row and a knit row. It's a purl row and a flat rib row. Then you stop and you go back to just the flat rib for a certain number of rows. And then you go back and you do the garter stitch section again, exactly the same way. And then you return to the flat rib and you'll get to the bottom of the leg. And where your bottom of leg is, she gives you a final leg measurement. And again, I did this for Lindsay. So I did it like she wrote it. So this is the actual length that she wrote the pattern. It might be a couple rows longer because I think I forgot to check and then I was past it and I was like, fine, now they have to match. So anyway, this is optional. Length on the leg is optional for all of you. If you want to make a short sock and only have one section of the garter, that's fine. You don't have to show your socks to Lindsay, but I do. So just make sure you're happy with what you're doing. And again, there's no knitting police or Lindsay going to come along and tell you have to do 2 inches of ribbing if you don't want to. This is all circular knitting. There is no special techniques other than knitting and purling involved. Once you've set it up, you're going to keep those ridges in the flat rib the same. So it should be quite straightforward for you. The homework for this week is to get from here to here, not this week, this month, is to get from here to the top of your ribbing, to the top of your heel ribbing. Heel. Don't you love me on Monday nights when I've worked all day? So I would like it if you can get to where you're going to start the heel before the next class. Some of you are going to get further than that. So please start the second sock and get it to the same place before you just blithely go on and do the heel, if possible. So your homework assignment is to do your sock to the top of the heel before the heel starts. And if you can get there sooner, awesome. Start your second sock and get them both to the same place. I think the biggest success that we have in doing this project and getting a finished pair of socks out of it is when we use our extra time between classes or between the times that we meet, catching up with the second sock. So I'm going to try and help you avoid second sock syndrome if I can. I'm hopeful, and I'll double check and I'll let you know by email. But I think that Lindsey is going to come in and do the heel with me. So I think she'll be our guest presenter that week in February. And it's a really pretty heel. I've tried these on. I really love how it feels. It feels a little cushier, even though it's not reinforced, but it is garter, and so it's cushy on both sides. So it's not just reverse stockinette, it's a garter stitch heel. And there is still slip stitches along the edge, but if you forget to slip a stitch, which a lot of us do, sometimes forget to slip a stitch, you can still pick up your stitches pretty easily because the ridges of the garter help you with that. Very standard heel turn that we're going to go over, and the gusset is not anything crazy.
Why?
Okay, sorry, thought that might be for me. So that's going to be the second class for this sock, and then we're going to finish the foot and do the toe with Kitchener at the toe for the last one. So I am delighted to see all of you. You are welcome to contact me by phone or email, or come into the shop if you're able to. Any questions about? My dog is back there like, I'm going to go get into trouble. I need to find something to eat. It's a very naughty boy. Any questions? Did we do okay on time? Yeah, I can't tell. I'm on full screen and I can't see. What time is it? Oh, 6:41. We did really well. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, and next time will be the heel and the heel turn and the beginning of the gusset.